is on. All right, so let's get started. My name is Aisha Shah. I'm a program manager on the Microsoft project team. And Eli and Dan and I are going to be talking about developing add-ins and apps for a project and kind of talking about different ways you can extend the project server and project client and project online. So we'll do a quick poll. How many people over here are familiar with Project Online? With clapping, sorry. All right. What about Project Server? All right. Seems like everyone knows what this thing is. So I'm going to skip that. For today's session, we're going to be talking a lot about more about Project Online and focusing a lot more on how you can extend Project Online in the client. Just keep in mind that whatever we talk about still extends to Project Server. So although our demos and everything will focus a lot more on Project Online, it still works on the server as well. A few caveats, but it'll work. OK, so in 2013, we introduced an app model in SharePoint, and that was kind of the new way to extend both SharePoint and Office. And before we go any further, you should know that we renamed it. So they're called add-ins. So there are a couple of sessions here and there that you'll hear people talk about add-ins, and some people might still call it apps. We're still transitioning with the naming, so they both essentially mean the same thing. So add-ins for SharePoint, add-ins for project, add-ins for Office. OK, so I'm going to start off by focusing a lot more on the add-ins for SharePoint and the add-ins for Project Online. And then Eli is going to come up and talk about add-ins for Office and Project Client. And then Dan's going to take you in a deep dive with a lot of demos and live code and show you about the great apps that they've built and talk about their experiences and how they've gone about in building add-ins, not apps. All right, so some history and how we got to where we are today. If you wanted to build something on SharePoint 2007, then you'd have to have your code running on the SharePoint web front end. And this was great because it gave you a lot of power and flexibility onto the kind of apps that you could build. But from the IT side, the admins were always concerned about what it was going to do to their environment. Would it bring it down? Was it going to destabilize it? So when we looked at 2010, we said, let's make sure that we can make all of this code run safely in a secure, isolated sandbox notion. And while that was great to help facilitate the conversation with IT, it was very restrictive for the developers, and it was very restrictive in terms of the functionality that you could provide. So when we looked at 2013, we tried to balance both of these concerns of running this code in a very secure and safe environment, and at the same time providing that same flexibility and the access to the full set of APIs for developers. And that's kind of how we evolved into the add-in model that we have today. So we kind of have a loosely coupled system where you have your code running on your own web server, on your own front end, and then we allow you to call into SharePoint and Project Online with a set of APIs so you can push data and pull data from project. So when I talk about actually SharePoint add-ins, it's pretty much the same thing as project add-ins. They're kind of go in line, and all the functionality and the capability is pretty much the same. These add-ins are essentially the model is a cloud-ready model. And when we say that, we not only mean that it works online, but it also works on premises. So this is kind of a really powerful concept because you can build one solution, and you can target both of these different set of environments. It also means that you have a hosting option where your code runs under completely your control. And you can virtually use any web technology that you want to build against it. And lastly, it also means that we have a pretty great lifecycle, and it's isolated. So when a user goes and adds an add-in to their project site, they're not going to be concerned about, is this going to bring my environment down? Is this going to break something? And at the same time, if they remove it or they uninstall it, everything that came with that add-in kind of gets cleaned up pretty nicely as well. The next thing that we invested in is a web standard-based model. So what this means is that we're really embracing things like JavaScript, HTML, OAuth, OData, and REST, and all of these web standards-based technologies. We've also done a lot of work to make the user experiences great. So these add-ins that you build won't feel like a random experience that's kind of just tacked on at the end, and it actually feels like a first-party experience. So when the user navigates from their project site to your add-in, you kind of maintain a lot of the visuals, and it looks like it feels integrated into the experience. And then finally, we have an integrated store, and that's kind of your mechanism for distributing and connecting to users and making these add-ins available for them. And at the same time, users can go there and explore and find solutions to problems that they're working on. Okay, so I mentioned hosting options earlier. We have two primary hosting options that we provide. The first one is a SharePoint hosted model, and this is for things that are mostly client-side. So if you have a lot of JavaScript or you're using a lot of client-side technology, that's the option that you should choose. If you're looking at, if you want to do something more complex, you want to go for the provider-hosted model where you have the code running on your own web server, and then you can make calls into project and SharePoint to push data into it or pull data out of it. And Dan's actually going to show a few demos on how you can go about building these things. All right, so some experiences that we saw people, some scenarios that we saw people building with the model are, custom methodologies and templates, line of business applications, so things like automated timesheet, data syncs with ERPs, reporting and dashboards, as well as contextual training content. And all of these different examples can manifest themselves on project sites in a bunch of different ways. So you could have full-page immersive experiences. You can have parts, so they're kind of like windows of functionality into the app that can be embedded on the project site itself. And then you also have custom actions, so you can integrate with the ribbon and the drop-down call-out menu. I think that's what we call them now. So how do you go about building these things? For an add-in for project and for SharePoint, the only thing that you actually need is a manifest file. And it's super basic, super simple. All you need to do is specify the version that you're targeting, the version of your add-in, the name, and then the launch URL. And the launch URL is essentially that full screen experience that we take you to when the user clicks on the app. The other thing I mentioned was an app part. Sorry, add-in part. I have to correct myself all the time, too. We just changed the name. So all you need for this is some basic metadata again. So it's the title, the description, and then you also, again, specify the URL that gets hosted in the iframe that's going to be on your project site. And if you want to add any properties to it, it's kind of the same as adding the web part properties if you're familiar with SharePoint development. So it's pretty simple. In the example that I have over here, I have a property for the price. And then you'll notice that same property is also a query string parameter on the URL. So that kind of enables the end-to-end flow. And the last piece would be the custom actions. So that's the ribbon and the drop-down callout. So if you've ever done development in SharePoint before, it's pretty much the same as what we always had. It's not much new or anything different. The main difference is that since this is going to be in the host web, you can't write JavaScript to it because of cross-site scripting issues. So for custom actions, though, the new thing that we added to enable more scenarios is what we call a host web dialog attribute. So when a user clicks on an action in the dropdown or in the ribbon, they can get a dialog instead of having to go to full-page experience. So that's something new that we added as part of the add-in model. Okay. So now to some of the new stuff, because everything I spoke about was stuff that we had some time ago, and we let it sit in, and we made a few updates to it. The newest thing I think we have right now, and you might have heard about this in some of the other talks, is the Office 365 APIs. So recently, the Office 365 team released a new set of APIs. And what these are is they're RESTful APIs that leverage OData 4.0 and OAuth 2.0, and they allow apps to connect to different Office 365 verticals. So this includes things like the contacts, calendar, Exchange, OneDrive files. The project piece isn't in here as yet, but we're working on it, so it should be coming soon. But the nice thing about this is that we leverage Azure as the auth provider, and we connect your Office 365 identity to consume all of these services. So you only, as a developer, you have to just authenticate once, and you have access to content from all of these services. In the past, you'd have to authenticate against Exchange, against SharePoint, against OneDrive, against project, and we're kind of unifying that experience, so you just do it once, and you can get access to all of this content. The other new thing that we added is we have these unified APIs, so we kind of need a unified landing place where you can go get this. So in the app launcher, you'll notice a small thing on the bottom that says My Apps. If you click on that, it takes you to a view where you can see all of the apps, like both of the out-of-box ones, so you see OneDrive and Power BI and other things show up here, but at the bottom, you also see all of the third-party apps that were installed from the store. And you can do things like pin these to the app launcher as well for quick access. So now that, when Dan will talk about how you can actually build this stuff in more detail, but once you build this, you're kind of, how do I get this out to customers? How do I distribute this thing? So we have an integrated store both in SharePoint and so SharePoint project sites as well as in the Office client and the project client. And Eli will talk a little bit more about the project client. But what the integrated store enables the user to essentially discover these apps and discover these things without having to go through an IT admin, without having to go to ask someone else to go develop something. And at the same time, we've done work to enable IT admins to put some hooks in control and monitor the things that people are purchasing. So we're kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit by giving users access to this stuff, but at the same time, we're trying to allow IT admins to kind of rail what they have access to. As a developer, you have a couple of different licensing models on how you can distribute the app. So the first one is it's a free app. And something new that we added over here is that previously we required the user to log in with their Microsoft ID. So not only the Office 365 credentials, but then also their Microsoft ID before they could even get a free app. We removed that restriction. So no login is required for free apps anymore. There are two different paid options. So one is just the perpetual paid license. And as a developer, you can choose to say, hey, I want this to be on a per user basis. I want it to be unlimited for the entire tenancy. The new piece that we added a couple of months ago is a subscription model. So that's based on a month-to-month subscription. And again, you can do this on a per user or for the entire tenancy. And for both of the paid options, you have the option of having a trial license. And with the trial license, there are actually a couple of different variations, and you can choose how you want to provide the trial. So you can say, I want it to be delimited by the days, or I want it to be limited by only 5 people in this tenancy has access to it, or you can use both the number of days and the number of people as well to restrict it. So the one thing to take away is that although we have all of these licensing options, Microsoft does not actually do any of the work to enforce the licensing, but we provide you APIs. So you can, when a user launches the app, you can use the APIs to find out, hey, does this person have a license to my app or not? And then you have the decision to deliver the kind of experience you want to. So, we've noticed some people actually give people full access. Some people have a limited experience because they want to give them a taste of what the app is like. And they use that to kind of draw that in and get more licenses. So it's up to you to decide how you want to surface that. The last distribution mechanism is the corporate catalog. And this is kind of that internal mechanism for admins to distribute internal tools. So a lot of times companies will have tools that are super customized, that are built for their specific organization, and they don't want to distribute them on a store. So what they do is upload the manifest file to the corporate catalog, and then we push this out to the My Apps page and all of the other end user experiences, so they appear in line with the apps that the user may have purchased from the store. So actually with that kind of wraps up some of the updates on the SharePoint side of things. As I mentioned earlier, Dan's going to go into some much deeper demos on how you build these things. But before that, Eli is going to talk to you about project client add-ins.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Eli Sheldon. I'm also a program manager on the project team over at Microsoft. Been there for about 4 years now, and have had the opportunity to really bring our project add-ins into life and into everyone's hands. I'm going to talk a little bit about what an Office add-in is. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Office apps, what they were previously called, as Aisha mentioned. I'm going to do a quick code demo leveraging some of the new stuff we've added for the Project 2016 client experience, and then I will hand it off to Dan. So for those who aren't aware maybe what an Office add-in really is, basically, it's a pretty simple combination of a manifest XML file hosted in the Office store or in your local add-in catalog, and then that points to a page somewhere. It could be on a web server, it could be Azure, it could be a publicly hosted website, it could be content that you've written, and really just that manifest, similar to the way the SharePoint parts work, that manifest plus that URL you're hitting together with interacting with the document that you're in makes that Office add-in experience. There are 3 different shapes for that. You can have a content add-in, which basically integrates with the document directly. So that could be in Excel. You have a map, as you see there. It could be in a Word document, something like an image that's really interacting with the document around it and stays there with the document. On the other side, you have a contextual add-in. These are mostly in Outlook and Outlook Web App right now. So if a mail that you have open that has an app in your Office Web App, Outlook Web App, or Outlook install sees there's a map in it or a meeting that it thinks it can get through some natural language processing, it'll go ahead and suggest making a calendar entry for you, for instance. We don't support either of those as Project. Project really just supports the task pane app. This is kind of more traditional. It's a pane, kind of like the task inspector if you're familiar with it in Project. It lives kind of alongside the document, and it offers some extended functionality based on the content of the document. It's not really embedded in that document, but it interacts with it in rich ways, which I will get to in a minute. So project add-ins, I'll talk a little bit about what we had in 2013, which is our in-market product today. And then I've highlighted here in yellow what we've added more recently based on a lot of customer feedback that we got to make really more powerful add-ins that can do much more with the project schedule. So in 2013, we let you read. So basically, you could select a task or select a task by its ID and figure out all the properties that were on that task or on the resource or at the project as a whole. With Project 2016, we now allow you to actually modify the project, so you can write back to it. If your app is maybe checking the schedule and sees that a task has a duration that's too short, it can go ahead and update that duration. It can update the name. It can update the resources assigned to it. Pretty much anything that the user can do, the head-in can now do on behalf of that user. It can tweak some of the settings with the document itself, so some of the project level information. And what's nice about these, they are more isolated than the traditional like COM add-ins that we used to have. So they're they're not going to crash the document if something goes wrong. They're not going to cause a big perf impact because they are kind of running in this isolated pane that's really just an instance of IE that's interacting through JavaScript with the document. I'll go through a code sample, but just as an example, some of the APIs that we have are there. So get task obviously loads all the data for the task. Get the project field would let you process specific data from the project level. Some of those new ones in yellow, set resource field, very similar to get resource field, but obviously the writing version, which again, new to Project 2016. Get max task index, I will show you how that's used in a minute, but one of the other things that we added in Project 2016 was the ability to basically iterate through and read all of the tasks rather than just the selected task, and that would be a convenience API that lets you figure out how many tasks to expect. We also offer event handlers, and so this would be if maybe you have training material that's specific to a view type. Say you want to talk the user through using the Gantt chart and have different material for if the user's in Team Planner. We'll actually alert you as to what view the user's in and when they change views, so you can react accordingly without having to constantly be pinging. So we've seen a lot of great scenarios so far. We definitely understand that in Project 2013, based on a read-only and single task selection experience, the scenarios were pretty limited. We think by offering both the writability now and by the ability to read the full project plan, we've hopefully expanded the bucket of scenarios by a little bit. But we've seen a bunch of kind of task auditors, things that look at your schedule, maybe make suggestions based on PMI standards, or just kind of preferences that you've set to make sure you have consistency and well-defined project schedules across your organization. Training, as I mentioned, if you have a set of contextual training material that can help the user as they're in the product instead of making them switch back and forth between a browser window and the actual project plan. Connecting some maybe Yammer feeds or social networking right in there so you can have an ongoing conversation about tasks or resources right within that same window. And then the kind of other bucket of scenarios is bringing in other aspects of Office 365 right into this project. And so if you're working on a project published in Project Online or Project Server, it probably has a project site associated with it. You could go ahead and bring in any of those SharePoint deliverables, risks, issues, documents, even maybe part of the OneNote notebook, because they're already authenticated to that site. And so it basically lets you bring in all the stuff you'd normally have to switch to a different app or to the browser for and service it kind of right in line and contextually with the project plan itself. The last slide I'll show before I jump in to show you what it really looks like. As far as development tools go, as I mentioned, it's just an XML file and then whatever website or web service you want. So you can build that pretty easily in Notepad. It's not a super long manifest. We do recommend Visual Studio for Project 2016 add-ins to use all of those new APIs with the rich integration and debugging experience you'd expect. You're going to need Visual Studio 2015, which is in C Customer Tech Preview, I believe, right now, but will be launched pretty soon. We have templates. We have kind of rich debugging. We have IntelliSense, all the stuff you'd expect with a pretty richly integrated thing. And hit F5, it'll launch up project. It'll be running without you having to worry about really deploying or setting up anything. So I'm going to show that. I'm going to show an example that you may have seen if you were at the Vision session that Mike and Howard were leading. Mike actually demoed an app that I spent a large part of my holiday break trying to write up to leverage both the existing APIs that we've had, but also the new stuff that we added with Project 2016. Cool. You can all see that. So this is Visual Studio 2015 CTP 6. And I'm just going to kind of step through first what the app does what the add-in does when it's running, and then I'll kind of step through the code. So again, to open up project with this add-in loaded, I'm just going to go ahead and hit start. This will launch project. This is the public preview that we launched earlier in the week. So these are the bits that you could have on your own system if you go to the loading area in the expo hall or download those. I'm going to open up a project that I think demonstrates this add-in pretty well. So what you see here is a pretty simple schedule. What the app does is a milestone completion service. So if you notice that some of these summary tasks, because they have an incomplete milestone following a whole bunch of complete tasks, they say 99%, that can be pretty annoying. Basically, if you finished all the tasks other than a milestone anywhere in your project along a predecessor chain, odds are you want that milestone complete as well. Normally, you'd have to go in and kind of manually update these or use an old school macro. So what this app is going to do is look for milestones whose predecessor chains, all the tasks that are linked to it, are going to be 100% complete, and then the add-in will mark them all complete. So I launch it by going to the Project tab in the ribbon, and then you'll see it's loaded right here under the Developer Apps section. This helps you realize that these are apps that you don't really have installed. They're just kind of running as long as you have the debugging mode active in Visual Studio. I will launch it, and so basically there is a XML manifest file that I've defined that's being hosted temporarily that project then reads into. Click Find Milestones to Complete. This should find the three between the Milestones to Complete section should find the first two ones I have highlighted in yellow, and then you can see Milestone 7 also highlighted in yellow as already complete, so that should show up at the bottom. So that kind of lets you preview what you want to do, and again, that's leveraging the new APIs that lets you read through the entire project, whereas in 2013 you'd have to kind of click each one and see if it qualified. And then when I click Complete these milestones, that'll be demonstrating the new write-back functionality that we have that actually allows you to edit any task by the ID that we already have loaded. So I'll mark them complete. You can see the normal project change highlighting in light blue there, and you can see that all the milestones that should be completed are now marked 100% complete. So I will stop that from running and kind of just real quickly walk through the code. I'm not going to go through line by line because it's long, but I'll be writing a blog post sometime in the next couple months with really the full details and full code sample of this in case you're interested and want to kind of get a quick jump start. Before I jump into the actual JavaScript code that runs this, I just kind of want to show you a little bit of what comprises this project file. So the manifest, what's nice about Visual Studio is you get a rich graphical interface to edit the manifest, and so you can set things like the title, the versions. Pretty much all the properties are exposed in a graphical way, but you can also, if anytime you want, open up the XML manifest file behind it. These two views, they look different. They're editing the exact same data. It's really up to you which one you prefer. And again, this is just the manifest file that defines essentially permissions, if it's read-only, if it's read-write, versions, if you want to limit it to a specific version of the project, or if you want to version your own app or add-in, and then what website or service it's going to load. Beyond that, it's pretty straightforward. This is based off of the Office add-in template that comes with Visual Studio. So if you were to make a new project that was the Office add-in template, you would see 90% of all these files already there. But as you'd expect, it's an HTML file that kind of defines the UI, some CSS that defines what it looks like, and then the JavaScript file is where pretty much all the interesting project APIs live. So I'm just going to step through this super quickly. I don't really expect people to follow along too much. I'll call out some of the project things, but I don't want to take up too much time. So again, look to that blog post in the future if you really want to see exactly how this works. But I'm just going to kind of scroll through what the functions do and how it kind of all plays together with the project APIs. So first, create a bunch of empty matrices. We load all of the milestones, and we do this by and that's kind of the main function. That's what clicking that first button does. So we get the get max task index, and the first time we actually use a project API is right here. So this is saying within the context of this document, get max task index async. So it is an asynchronous API call that's going to talk into the document that you have open through JavaScript and see what the max ID is. So if there are 50 tasks, it'll tell you 50. That way you're not iterating through tasks that don't exist, trying to get their task IDs. Once we know that, we can load all the tasks into a matrix. We do that by iterating through get task by index. Pretty straightforward. We're just loading all of those ID values. We then go through each one and figure out the milestone. We have this great field, so we can call get task field, and specify one of the fields we want to use. Obviously, we have this task milestone field. We just have to check whether that's true or not. Bless you. Then we want to figure out if those are complete. If the milestone's already complete, we can exclude it. So we just check for that set of milestones. We, again, use the get task field call and see if % complete is equal to 100. And if it's not, we put it in our new incomplete milestone matrix. Next, we try to read all the predecessors. So again, since this app checks all the predecessors for any given incomplete milestone to make sure they are all complete, we go through each one and just load that full chain of predecessors back all the way to the start of the project, load all those up, and then verify that those predecessors by iterating through each row, which is all the predecessors for any given milestone, and then going down for each milestone, verifying that everything in that chain is 100% complete. Then we add it to the array of things we're going to complete. And then we show them to the user, and then allow them to... This is our set task field. So again, the equivalent of get task field, but this is the new 2016 write fields, and we set the % complete of that set of milestones we've identified to complete. So that's pretty much all there is to that. I know, again, that was real fast. Feel free to wait for the blog post or check the recording. I think this code sample can be published with the project deck if you want to go find that later, but hopefully it was pretty straightforward. So with that, I will hand it off to Dan to walk you through some of the great stuff that Sensei is doing and kind of his experience building on top of our platform.
So can everybody hear me? That sounds good. Got me? Okay. So as Eli's mentioned, I'm Daniel McDonald, a Director of Development at Sensei Project Solutions. And I've been doing this for, well over 20 years now. And most of that time I've worked on Microsoft development platforms. And I've had the opportunity to work on several solutions that targeted Microsoft Project for Your Desktop, Project Online, and Project Server. And it's this experience that's brought me to my current responsibilities, which are leading the apps initiative at Sensei Project Solutions. A little bit about us at Sensei. Our company is totally focused on the Microsoft PPM solutions, so Project on Your Desktop, Project Server, and of course, Project Online. And we're thrilled, really thrilled to have had those efforts recognized by being named Partner of the Year for Project and Portfolio Management. So there's 4 parts of our business. We have services, solutions such as our report packs, computer-based training products, as well as classroom training. But the part of the business I want to talk about today is our work with applications that target Microsoft Project. And specifically today, I'm going to talk about our work interfacing with Project Online and Project Server. So just a quick show of hands and how many people here would consider themselves developers. Okay, so my talk is probably geared mostly for the developers. We're going to look at a lot of code and how we interface with Project Online and Project Server. So we're going to start off, we're going to talk about Project Online, Project Server. We're going to see how we as developers can build solutions that target Project Online and Project Server that add real value to either our own organizations or our customers. But given the time that we have today, I'm only going to be able to touch the tip of the iceberg. So at the end of the session, I'm going to put up some reference material where you can go and continue the journey and learn more about Project Online and Project Server and how to develop for those. So Ace just mentioned a little bit about Project Online and Project Server and how it takes the functionality that's available for basically your project manager on your client desktop and enhances that into a full project and portfolio management suite solution. So it's going to include things like project prioritization, time entry, resource management, so a full PPM solution. Now, Project Server has been around, well, I worked on it well over 15 years ago when it was Project Central. So it gets deployed in-house on your own web server, and as such, it's going to require personnel to do the deployment, the ongoing administration. And more recently, Microsoft's introduced Project Online, and that takes the same functionality and offers it as a cloud solution. So the great thing about that, it takes away a lot of that effort you require to deploy the solution and do the ongoing administration. So since they're parallel solutions, as Esha mentioned, we're going to talk about Project Online, but most of what I talk about also would apply equally to Project Server. So before I dive down into the how we can interface with Project Online, I want to talk a little bit about the whys. And I think as IT professionals, we've somewhere along in our career experienced the reality of the painful reality of IT projects, where despite our tremendous efforts and the tremendous efforts of our team, the projects have either run extremely late or well over cost, and in the worst case scenarios, they failed altogether. So I'm not going to concern myself too much with the numbers, because depending on what analyst you look at, the numbers can vary quite a bit. But what they do agree on is that our organizations or our customers lose a lot of value on projects that just don't succeed. So implementing PPM best practices using Microsoft Project Online greatly improves our ability to deliver projects on time and within budget. But there's still a lot of opportunity for us as developers to build on top of Project Online and customize those to add even more value. So I want to talk about some of the applications scenarios that we've identified to add some of that value to our customers. So if you had a chance to see the vision and roadmap session, you may have seen our Sensei Taskmaster, and that addresses an application scenario that I call Microsoft Project Anywhere, where it actually takes functionality that is available in Project Online, but what it does is it makes that available on other devices, such as, in this case, your phone devices, so your iPhone, Android, or Windows Phone 8. And we also want to ensure that your PMO and your executives have really good visibility into your project portfolio in order to be able to quickly identify any projects that may have issues or resources working on those projects. So we have, and hopefully get a chance to show this, our Sensei Portfolio Dashboard, which addresses this application scenario. And the last one is just some general maintenance within our Project Online environment. And we get a lot of customers who just want to be able to do changes over, the same change over hundreds or thousands of projects in their environment. And we address this with our Sensei bulk update. So I'm going to show how we can interface with Microsoft Project. I'm going to do that using a few demos. The first one will be a Windows application that I've already created that interfaces using the client-side object model. So in this case, we can use either Visual Basic or C#. In our example, we're going to use C#. In the second example, I'm going to take that same functionality and create a SharePoint add-in that interfaces with Project Online using the client-side object model, or the JavaScript object model, or JSON. This is going to be a SharePoint-hosted solution, so it's going to be all client-side code. So with that, I'm going to start the first demo. And so I went a little old school here and just created a simple Windows Form application. I'm actually going on vacation in about a week, and I thought it would be a nice idea for this demo to build an application which would allow me to take some of the projects that I'm working on and assign them to some of my unsuspecting team members. So this is what we're going to do here. So we sign in, we're going to go up to Project Online, and read our resources and projects. And we're going to load our projects into our grid view, which is already done, and we load all our resources into the drop-down. So then we can go and select some of the projects that I'm working on, hit update, and that would assign those to a new owner. But before we do that, I want to look at what's going on behind the scenes. So we'll start with a little bit of maintenance. So when you're building a solution for a project server, you're going to need some SharePoint libraries. So in this case, we have the SharePoint client and client runtime, as well as the project server client. So the SharePoint libraries will be available with Visual Studio. The project server library is available as part of the project SDK. And I wanted to show what functionality was available in the actual client-side object model. So you see as I scroll through that you have a lot of functionality available and exposed for Project Online. So we can work with things like task assignments. We can read and update our enterprise resources. And typically, any solution we're going to build is going to have some interface with our projects in our environment. And we can also build solutions that target time entry. So in our case, we're just going to be working with our enterprise resources and projects. So we're going to look at the code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect to our Project Online environment. So we just do that by getting the project context using the URL that we entered, as well as the SharePoint credentials, online credentials. Since this is Project Online, we're going to use the SharePoint Online credentials. If you were doing a project server, this would be your network credentials. And then we're going to simply load the projects and enterprise resources. And a couple of things I want to point out with the load. By default, when you load projects and resources within Microsoft Project, it's only going to load the base properties. And so we can use these Lambda statements to get some of the linked information that we need. So we're going to get owner, and we're going to get the base properties as well as owner, and we're going to get resources with the base properties as well as the associated SharePoint user. And then we'll go once. And the other thing I wanted to point out was that neither one of these load statements gets executed until we run the execute query. So this way, we can load up a number of requests to Project Online and run those with one query statement. And so in this case, we're actually going to get both the projects and enterprise resources with one call. And then we're simply going to load our projects and load our resources. And that's going to just loop through the project collection and add entries to our grid view, and loop through the enterprise resource collection and add members to our drop-down. And then we're going to be able to update those projects. So and that's kind of the heart of the functionality. So we're going to find the resource that we selected as well as the projects that we selected for update. And then we're going to loop through each of those selected projects and update that owner. So projects within Project Online are updated using a check-in mechanism. I think we're all familiar with it as developers. So the first thing we need to do is check out that project. And then we update the owner to the new owner that I selected. And then we do the update on that draft version of the project. We wait for that to complete. And if that completes successfully, we then publish the updates into a Project Online environment. If it fails, we do a check-in just to make sure that we're not locking that project for other users. And then once we've done the publish, we go off and we're going to update our project grid with the new project information. We're just going to see, and just run that so we can see how that runs. And I'm going to, I won't do it to Kenneth, he's busy enough. So it's going off and it's retrieving the projects from a Project Online environment. It's updating that owner field and then it's going to publish those updates back up to project online. And this sometimes takes a few seconds, and hopefully with this environment we'll be able to see the results pretty quickly. And there you see it's gone off, reread the projects, and then now I don't have quite as much work for my vacation. So that's all good. So I want to show that we can do this, build the same functionality in a SharePoint app. So before I do that, typically the client-side object meta we would use with provider-hosted solutions. I just actually recently had to build a Windows application that uses CSOM, so I thought I'd show that for this session. But we can build the same functionality using the JavaScript object model. So in this case, we're going to build a add-in, and this SharePoint add-in is SharePoint hosted, which means that it's all client-side code. So we're going to have to interface with the Project Online environment using the JavaScript object model, or JSON. So in order to get an idea of kind of the process flow, I'm going to actually build this project from scratch. So we're going to come up, and have people built SharePoint add-ins or apps for SharePoint before? Can we show of hands? Okay, a few of you. For those of you who haven't, you can go in, and you'll get an app for SharePoint template, and that's available both in the C# group and the Visual Basic. Oh, sorry. So we'll show that again. So you'll get a app for SharePoint template available both in the C# and the Visual Basic group. So if your solution has server-side code, you can choose whichever one you want to use. In our case, it's going to be all client-side code, so we can just go ahead. And I'm going to name this. And go off and create it. So the SharePoint, and I'm just going to double check, make sure that's right. Yes, we want those environments. And I'm going to actually have to log in here. So the Visual Studio is going to go off and create this SharePoint add-in. And when it does that, it actually creates a solution that will work. We'll have all the components that you need to build a solution for SharePoint, but we actually want to target Project Online. So we're going to have to add a reference to the Project Online library. And SharePoint is SP, and project is Project Server, PS. So we add a reference to the Project Server library. And while we're here, I'm going to actually add my HTML code. In the interest of time, I saved all my code as code snippets. So we'll just insert that. So pretty simple, just a table to hold our projects, a select control to hold all of our resources, and the button to do the update owner. I also want to point out the app manifest. Aisha briefly mentioned that during her part of the session. So here it identifies the solution, but the part I wanted to point out is permissions. So your SharePoint add-in is going to run with its own permissions. So when we're developing our solutions, we have to specify exactly the permissions that we need for our application. And you notice when I drop down, there's several here that are project server permissions. And in our case, we need to be able to read the enterprise resources. And we need to write to multiple projects. And that should be all we need now. So now we can just add our code, and I'll show you the same example running in with the JavaScript object model. So by default, the SharePoint add-in template is going to create a kind of a hello world application that displays the username, but we don't need any of that. So I'm going to add the code for our example. So here we're going to go and get the current context. Since it's a SharePoint add-in, we're going to be able to get the context within our current environment. And then we're going to, similar to what we did in the JSON, we're going to load our projects, including the owner, load our resources, including the SharePoint user, and then we're going to execute the query. So I've concluded the actual code from our client-side, our CSOM example, so you can see that they're quite parallel. But a couple of differences. The main difference I want to talk about is the execute query. So here in the JSON, that's going to be done asynchronously. So we go off and we do an asynchronous call to the execute query. And so when it comes back, if it fails, we're going to call our query failed event. But hopefully it succeeds, and we're going to call the load projects and resources. And that's simply going to load the project grid and load the resources dropdown. And for this, we just loop through, get the project enumerator, loop through, and insert a row into the grid for each of those projects. And that row will contain an attribute for the ID, the name, as well as the name of the owner, name of the product and the name of the owner. And similarly, we get, for the resource, we get the enumerator, loop through that enumerator, and load the resource name into the dropdown. And then we do, now I do want to sort of the update owner functionality. So here we get the selected resource and all the selected projects. So then we're going to loop through all the selected projects and do functionality that should be fairly familiar from our JSON example. We're going to check that out, check the project out. We use set owner to update the owner. We publish the project back, and then we wait for that job to be done. And once it's completed, we run our callback, the publish finish callback. A responsive 0 means that something went wrong. We'll print out an error message. Responsive format means everything went fine, and we're going to update the. We're going to reload that project, get that new owner, and then update the row in the table. So let's actually run that. Hopefully that will run. So right now what's happening is it's going off and it's installing our application into the project online environment. So this typically takes 13 or 14 seconds, so hopefully that will be the case today. And there we go, it's starting to install. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to show that when you're installing the application, remember we set the permission. So what it does is it's going to ask the user when they install the application if they are okay with those permissions that you asked for. So here you'll see some general SharePoint permissions, but we also we're asking the user whether they want to let us have write access to the projects and whether they want us to be able to read the enterprise resources. So I trust my code, so I can hit trust it. And it's going to go off and it's going to read those projects, read those enterprise resources, and drop it down. And hopefully this will work again, and I can assign one of my other projects. This time I'll give it to Kenneth just because he's here and we'll bug him. Okay, so now it's gone off. It's updating the owners. And that should be updated in a couple seconds. And you can see it's updated the project. So you can do the exact same functionality using both JSON and the client-side object model, and depending on what type of solution you need. So for For the JavaScript object model, you're going to be targeting web applications or SharePoint-hosted solutions. For the client-side object model, you're going to be targeting provider-hosted solutions or potentially Windows applications. There are a couple of other ways that we can interface with Microsoft Project Online. There's a couple of OData web services that have interface. The first one is the project reporting service. And so these all support OData. And you can see that this one has the project data endpoint. So as the name implies, this is a service that does a really good job of optimizing the retrieval of large amounts of reporting data. And we use this extensively in actually our custom reports for Project Online environment. But you can also use it if you're building applications that also require that large amount of reporting data. And I'll show you how we actually use that in one of our apps, the Sensei Portfolio Dashboard. But the reporting service only supports read. So there's only can read data from Project Online. There's no update functionality exposed. If you want to do that, you can use the REST interface for Project Online, which is exposed using the project server endpoint. So this allows you to both do all the CRUD operations, so you can read and write to the Project Online environment. If you've done project server development in the past, you've probably used the project server API, and that's still available. The project server interface, or PSI, that's still available, but it doesn't really support Project Online. So we have not used it in any of our commercial solutions. But if you're building a solution that's just targeted for your own on-premise environment, that's still an available option. So one of the things I really like about OData is the fact that you can test your requests, GET requests, simply using the browser. So I'm actually going to show how you can do that to get like projects or resources. And let's see if I can bring that up now. So I'll bring up a request to get the projects in my development Project Online environment. So let me zoom in there a bit. So here you can see it's just the project data endpoint, and we're getting all the information on projects. So we can also do that for resources. But typically, you're not going to want to get all the information in all the fields for the information in your Project Online environment. So we can use the OData syntax to select specific fields that we're interested in, and then filter the results to be specific types of records. So I'll do that. So in this case, we're going to select just a resource name, resource email, a resource ID, and we're going to filter them to be only the resources that are active. We can run that. And you see this time we get a much more focused result set. So just the ID, the resource name, and the resource email address. So I actually use this quite a bit just to try and find out what data I have in my Project Online environment, what kind of functionality is exposed when I'm building my apps and testing my apps. But you might want to see how that you can actually do this with our JSON example. So I'm going to pull up an update to the JSON sample that I showed previously that will show how you can use the OData interface. So the first thing I want to mention is that because we're using the reporting service, we have to add a new permission that lets us read the reporting service. And then I'm going to show you the updates for the actual code. So we're still getting the projects using the JavaScript object model, but now we're going to get the users using the OData interface. So we format our request URL. In this case, we're going to just get the resource account, user account, and the resource name. And we want to make sure we don't get any of the generic resources. And then we're going to make a get an AJAX request to get that information. And if that's successful, then we're going to load our resource dropdown. And otherwise, we'll print a message. And so we're going to pass the results from that request to the load dropdown, and then we're going to loop through those results and load that resource dropdown. And we can run that now just to see how that runs. So I actually had already installed this application in my environment. Otherwise, it would have asked for us for permissions that would have included the reporting service. So you see that we got the same resource dropdown, but this time we got it using the OData interface. Now I want to show one of the applications that we've developed that actually makes extensive use of the OData interface, and this is our Sensei portfolio dashboard. So it's going off and getting a lot of information about all the projects in your portfolio, all the resources in your environment, any issues, risks, and then reporting that using charts, graphs, tables. So your PMO or executive can look at the scatter chart here and identify projects that may be running. You see most of the projects have a run along this pretty much straight line where the original estimated cost equals the actual cost. But we have some projects, like this one here, where the cost is significantly, there's a significant cost overrun. So we can click on this and get more information. Or we can look at the projects and we can see some of the projects that have large costs, and we want to pay particular attention to them, so we can click on them and drill down and get further information. And we can look at our resources and check and see if any of our resources have major over allocations. And we can see there's quite a bit of Dana here has a lot more has a lot of demand, so we can click down on her and get a more detailed view of how that demand filters out, and we can see that she's really over allocated July, August, September, October. So just wanted to quickly show what kind of functionality you can build using Project Online. So this information is all coming from Project Online, and we're being able to build tables, graphs, heat maps to kind of expose that information to the PMO and project executives. So my main goal here was just to kind of show you all the different interfaces there are to Project Online. And we're not able to go really deep into all the functionality that's available. But when I showed the object model, you got a little bit of an idea of how much you can do with Project Online. If you want to continue on your journey, I've included some references. I think the Office Dev Center is kind of the first place to go to get any information about project, Office development in particular, SharePoint and project development. the MSDM forum to go for your issues, any issues you have or questions. You can go there. Typically, other people, if you have the issue, somebody else has already asked the question. Otherwise, you can post your questions on the MSDM forum, and people like Eli watch that and answer our questions. And then there's MSDM blogs. And I pointed out one here that Eli has posted, just getting you started with the app development from a project point of view. And the final one is the Microsoft Virtual Academy. So this is where you go to find videos about training videos, videos for your live events, so another great resource. So that's all I have for today. So I'm going to pass it off to Eli to kind of close up, and thank you for your time.
So if you're interested in some more Office development sessions, here are 3 that we found that are still coming up this week that seemed pretty appealing. There are also some project sessions to come. With that, we can take questions, and if you'd kindly come up to the microphone so that the recording will pick you up and we don't have to repeat the question, that'd be great. Otherwise, again, thanks for coming. We'll also be at the project booth. Feel free to stop by and ask us any questions sometime tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. When will you start to support via the API to manage cost values? So it's since 2007 version, it's there, but there's no support for all these years.
Are you talking with CSUM or with the JavaScript API?
Either CSUM or the old PSI or in any way. So we have we can enter costs via the project client, but we cannot manage it via the API. So
I don't know, Aisha. No, we may have to take that one offline and kind of understand the scenario you're looking for a little bit better. So yeah, follow up with us.
Yeah.
Anything else? Cool. Thank you all for coming.